Yes. So, yeah, so we're recording, and I guess I'll just say once again for folks joining us, thanks for being here. I'm Katie at McCrosty Art Center, and I'm excited that you can join us tonight for our monthly artist talk. And the talk usually lasts about an hour. We'll have time for questions, but if you have, Susan was saying, if you would like to ask questions throughout, feel free to unmute and chime in at any point. Um, and let's see, any other logistics? Probably not any other logistics, really. Most of us have probably done a few Zooms by now. So I just wanted to say that you will be able to view or you can view the exhibit on our website, mccrostyartcenter.org. You can also see it in person at our galleries in downtown Grand Rapids, and it'll be up through the month of April. So it'll be on view in person there. And I just wanted to say a big thanks to our sponsor of this month's exhibit, Barb Popkin. And we appreciate all of our exhibit sponsors that help make that program possible for us. And I think without sort of forgetting, I should know all my logistics by now. I don't think I have anything else to go over at this point. So I will hand it over to Susan, and we can get into the talk portion of things here. And again, thanks for being here.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. I will, first of all, get this set up to slideshow, play from the start. Oops, but I didn't share the screen, did I? Hang on just one moment, so sorry. I think I have to do that first. Share screen. And share. So does that look about right, Katie?
Yep, that looks great. Yeah, and then when you just start the slideshow, that'll be
Okay.
perfect.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thanks, Katie. This Zoom talk goes into a little bit about this exhibit, Flights of Fantasy, Birds, Nature, and Art at Play. And it's a behind the scenes look at some of the processes and some of the research that went on in the course of this project year. My name is Susan Feigenbaum. I am a ceramic artist and a teaching artist based in Eden Prairie. My website's pretty simple. It's just myname.net. And for those of you who might know a little German and a little bit about trees, my last name translates to fig tree. And I'll give you a little background before getting into the work in this exhibit. I did start as a functional ceramic artist after moving to Minnesota from Chicago. And I got quite taken up with the Minnesota philosophy of pottery. And so I began working on the wheel. Of course, these are slab constructions. They are not wheel thrown. But I did begin on the wheel. And I began to alter my work so much that I finally figured, well, it doesn't make sense to do functional work if it's all non-functional. So I began to totally just do sculpture at that point. And some of the work that you'll be seeing here was shown in various exhibitions at the NCECA conference, which was held in March of 2019 in Minneapolis. I think I had work in about 6 juried or invitational shows at that conference. So it was a really intense, busy time. This overview here will give you an idea of the kind of work that I was doing and still love to do. This is prior to the work in the show, which is of course bird-based and habitat-based. But you'll see that I love color, and I enjoy doing the environments that have little abstract beings gathered together and that interact within kind of an otherworldly environment. And I also do singular pieces like ornamented tubiform on the right. And you'll also notice that I have a really good time with surface effects. I love to do tactile glazes. that are beaded or that have a crusty sort of surface. And I like to combine all of those surfaces in one piece at times. And this is another sampling of work that I've done recently. On the left is a composition using 3 elements called 3 of a Kind. The center one, if you take a look at the blue figure on the right of the center, this piece is currently in an exhibit at the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport in their exhibition space in the main terminal. And let's see, oh, we've got a triptych, a wall triptych here. Again, a lot of texture and a lot of color and different surface effects. Very abstract, totally from my imagination. This piece on the right is titled Facing the Flame on the Altar of Dazzling Perplexity. And it's a wall piece with different components. And you'll see that some of them are project out from the wall and cast interesting shadows. This was in a show at NCCA, along with another one of my pieces that you can see through the doorway there. I also had work in Women Who Teach at St. Catherine University. My work is on the right, a wall piece, and then the work that represented my students is here on the left, and I taught at residences for older adults over a period of 4 years. I would come to each residence for twice a month, and each month we would do a different project, like tiles or bird sculptures, pinch pots. And it was a very rewarding experience. It was all about the benefits of lifelong arts learning. And each year I showed their work at the Eden Prairie Library, just to inform the public about the benefits of lifelong arts learning. You can see sprongs in the lower left part of this show. Again, a gathering of about 10 or 12 of them, which can be composed in different ways. It's a purely abstract piece. I participate in Art-A-Whirl. I'm a member of a group of artists at the Northrop King building in Studio 423. It's also known as Studiopolis. If you're ever in the Northeast Minneapolis Arts District, come on up and have a look at our view of the Minneapolis skyline. And we all do different media, and it's always a great visit. So I encourage, if you're in town and we're open for an event, please do stop by. Now this project, the Flights of Fantasy, which is showing at the McCrosty, began with a grant that I received from the Minnesota State Arts Board. And my proposal was to create abstract ceramic sculptures of birds in their habitats. And I have this exhibit. I'm giving an artist talk, and I also presented a workshop at the Arboretum. My purpose was to explore a new approach. As you saw with my previous work, it was totally sourced from my imagination. And this work, I wanted to make direct observation of nature on field trips, birding field trips. And I also studied natural science resources in the library of the Arboretum, the Anderson Horticultural Library. They have a marvelous collection. This is just a little review of the workshop. The work they make is so much fun. These are a couple of demo birds I made to illustrate the techniques that we'd be using in the workshop. And these were adults and children working side by side at the Arboretum. We started with pinch pots, and they observed birds that they wanted to create images, and had a really good time with underglazes. And the results are always fun. I love teaching workshops. We learned a lot, clay hand building techniques and about how the clay process works, and had a good time. I brought all the work back to my kiln for glaze firing and then brought it back to the Arboretum. That's how the process worked in this workshop, and also when I taught at senior residences. So while all this was going on, I had to think about my birds that I wanted to sculpt and art and clay, and how I was going to do all this. So I knew I was going to make abstract depictions of these birds and their habitats. And abstraction exists along a continuum. I knew that I did not want to do literal representations, because that's just it's not my style, as you saw from my previous work. So the departure from an accurate depiction can be very little, partial, or totally abstract. I just wanted to show you a couple of my favorite artists and their birds, because I find that I get most of my inspiration from my ceramics from painters rather than from other ceramic artists. Charles Birchfield is one of my favorite guys. He was an American watercolorist, and he loved nature and depicting birds. This painting on the right, the red woodpecker, you can see the bird here, but you can also see not only the visual of the bird, but you can see movement, and you can see representations of sound that Birchfield wanted to convey. And he did this in much of his work, I should say, combining those two, the visual as well as the sound. And his work has kind of a spiritual quality for me. I really enjoy his landscapes and fantasy compositions that he created. This is a very copy heavy slide, but the main point of it is that Birchfield was probably synesthetic, and that's exactly what I was referring to earlier, when a stimulus in one sense simultaneously evokes a sensation in another sense. So visually, he was looking at a bird, and the sensation of sound also was brought forth in his creative process. So that's what he did throughout his work, and I hope you have a moment to look him up if you're not familiar with him. He's really quite beautiful, beautiful watercolors. Another well-known artist that I enjoy is Paul Klee. And you can see the abstraction of the birds here in Twittering Machine, which is at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Very abstract and simplified. And another one of his paintings, Landscape with Yellow Birds, a little less abstract. You can actually make out a specific form. One of the quotes that I pulled out, one of them that I really am attracted to, or is meaningful to me, is art does not reproduce the visible, rather it makes visible. And I think that's what I try to do in the ceramics that I make. I do not want to just do a representative vision, but bring something forth that perhaps people, the viewer, has not seen or thought of. So for this particular project, I had to decide what birds I wanted to represent. And of course, it would have been fun to do these guys, but these are not Minnesota birds. So I had to refocus a bit and refer to the 249 breeding species of Minnesota birds. And I took a look at various factors, aspects of those birds, their habitats, behavior, food sources. And since I love color, I had to get that in there. I maybe wanted to get in a lesser known species. And then I wanted to get in, of course, some of my favorites and some very favorites of all of us in Minnesota. So this was kind of like trying to pare down a huge guest list for a wedding reception. 249 to choose from, and I narrowed it down to 17. One of my resources was the Minnesota Breeding Bird Atlas, which provided very detailed information about the birds that were breeding during the period of 2009 to 2013 as kind of a snapshot, but very good data. So if you're into birding, you might want to have a look at this sort of resource. I also considered the biomes and habitats. I wanted to represent birds that live in particular areas in the state, like prairie, the northern forests, deciduous forests, wetlands and marsh, lakes and rivers. And then I think I added this one as kind of a little urban and garden habitat that we all can relate to. One of my resources at the Arboretum Library was Robert's Birds of Minnesota, published in 1932. It's really a fun book to read. It's almost like he's telling stories about these birds as if they are personal experiences, meeting them in the wild. And it's really quite a fascinating read, as well as a great resource visually. One of the things I also did was go on field trips. And one of the highlight field trips was to Southwest Minnesota in the grassland and prairie land around Luverne. And I had never been to that part of the state. And this is an example of my birding checklist from that trip with the Minnesota Ornithological Union. Ornithologists Union is the official title. So the first bird I want to talk about is the bobolink. This guy was quite visible in the Southwest prairie and grassland habitat. His Latin name translates to rice eating. And initially, in the early days of farming, the bobolink was kind of a pest for a lot of farmers who were trying to grow grain. They would swarm down and eat a lot of it. The prairie that was in the southwest area of the state is a remaining part of the original tall grass prairie that existed here in this state. The prairie in that area at Pipestone has never been plowed, but it was used for grazing only until this national monument was established to preserve it. And so it supports a lot of bird life, and the grasses were also sources of food and medicine for the Native Americans. So this is a typical bobolink habitat. This is at late May in a very soggy spring, so things were just beginning to come up in terms of prairie grass. So these are the types of native grasses that the bobolinks and other grassland birds need for their food. And these are examples of the actual plants, photos taken at the Arboretum. They have a great grass collection. So the bobolink is one of the world's most impressive migrants. It travels from Minnesota all the way down into the Andes area of South America. It's amazing that they put on such mileage. This is the work in the show, Prairie Flight. And you can see in the background that I have impressed some rice grain into the background of the piece, the base of the piece. These, the upper areas kind of represent clouds, but they also refer to the Andes Mountains and the mountainous areas in South America where the bird migrates. And the lower abstractions refer to prairie grasses and seeds. I included this was on my way home from Luverne. This was, I stopped and took a picture outside of Mankato. It was a very flooded spring that in 2019. And so I spotted these cormorants and pelicans, and I happened to find this illustration in the Birds of Minnesota, and it's virtually the same scene. We've got the pelicans and cormorants, and I was just amazed that I came upon this exact depiction. I mean, art imitates life, or vice versa in this case. I thought it was fun to see the exact scene. Um, the American bittern is a favorite bird of mine. It's one that you usually don't see. It lives in marshes and wetlands. However, they are very loud when they do call. They have a booming, booming call. And I encourage you to have a listen on YouTube. It's really fun to hear. So again, I researched this at the library, finding references to how this bird looks and how it's been illustrated. And considering its habitat, I also had a look at the illustrations of cattails and marsh plants. And I encourage you, if you have a chance to go to the library, if you're in the Twin Cities, make an appointment to go to the rare book collection and enjoy these wonderful resources. Here's a bittern, and this is a photograph I took about less than a mile from my house in Eden Prairie in a preserved wetland. And you can see this guy is virtually invisible. And so I was thrilled to catch this one out in the open. The bittern in the show kind of began like this, with some slabs, and I formed it roughly and then paddled it so that it had the form that I was after. And the image on the right here shows the bittern surrounded by all of the abstract reeds and cattails that it lives in nature, in its habitat. This is a rather busy picture, but you can, if you don't get to see the show in Grand Rapids, this gives you an idea of the scale of the piece, and all the tall reeds and the bittern hidden in its habitat. Well, we all know and love the cardinal, right? And it's a bird that is relatively common, and even in suburban areas and open woodlands. And what I wanted to do to convey this bird is to sculpt the wings so that it suggested the movement of the wings, fluttering or flying. And so that was my approach with the cardinal as an abstraction. And there were lots of things I changed along the way. I had less than a year to create the work for this show that was originally on exhibit at the Arboretum Library. But I tried a habitat for the cardinal. This was intended to be a bird bath. But as I put it together and glazed it, I wasn't happy with the result. And so I had to come up with different solutions for some of these pieces along the way, which created a lot of panic, actually. This is a look at my work table, maybe 2 weeks before the opening of that show. And you can see just about every work is here, and I'm working on everything simultaneously. And there's the cardinal as a finished piece. And then I had to figure out what's his habitat going to be? Well, I found this and I loved it. This is a cardinal on a sprung. And I think the contrast in color and the harmony of the movement between the bird and the form just is something that I was very happy with, and it was serendipitous. Red-headed woodpecker is one of my favorite birds. It loves open woodlands, and we saw a lot of these out in the Laverne area in southwest Minnesota. And I hadn't seen one in probably 20, 25 years, so I was really thrilled. Here's how they're illustrated in the Birds of Minnesota. A very striking pattern. And of course, that appealed to me. One of the famous ornithologists in the 1700s was named Alexander Wilson. And when he saw a red-headed woodpecker, that was his spark bird. That's what got him excited about ornithology. And so I thought that was an interesting little fact about the red-headed woodpecker. And this bird stores food. It hides food under tree bark. It's pretty much omnivorous. And this is a detail here of a piece in the show called Treasure Seeker. And you can see that pattern, that bold pattern of color with some abstract tree bark. And then these little metallic accents are meant to be the food that it is seeking, that it has placed in the bark. Well, you gotta love a goldfinch. We saw lots of these out in the grasslands around in Southwest Minnesota. And of course, they're in our local habitats as well. You may be interested in a bit of process. I did sketch these compositions. I sketched in a real notebook and also on my phone. This is an example of a gestural phone sketch that I probably did at 2 or 3 a.m. Knowing that the goldfinch loves to eat thistle seeds, I wanted to include that in the habitat. So I experimented with different ways of representing thistles. Here's a bird in the hand, and this is how I chose to represent the goldfinch. I think of it as a very lyrical bird with swooping flight and a chattering disposition. And so that's what inspired the stylistic pattern that I created on the male and the female. Again, this is an example of a habitat that changed. I had a goldfinch in this habitat and just didn't feel that it was right. So there was a lot of back and forth and different considerations as this show came together. The female goldfinch is pictured in a Bonaparte ornithological book about birds of the United States. And he continued the work that was begun by Alexander Wilson. This is the composition Thistle Visits, with the male and female goldfinches visiting the thistles. And that's how the final thistles. And it's a triptych with a little cloud formation between them. And here's a close-up. Again, different glazes that I love to use. The dark-eyed junco. Okay, this guy is very much often overlooked. He's can be called a snowbird here in Minnesota because he follows the same pattern that a lot of people like to follow here, going south for the winter and then coming north for the summer. He forages in leaf litter, and that's where he finds, that's where they find their food as a ground forager. So I wanted to show that in the work. And I was exploring leaf litter, abstract leaf shapes, and different patterns to have on those leaf shapes. And then I also experimented with the type of base that the bird would be placed on in the leaf litter. Again, those I totally changed, and this is how it wound up. Leaf litter delight is the final piece. And I think most of the decisions I made were good ones. You never know for sure while you're doing it. The American crow, very common bird, and very intelligent. They're from the family Corvidae, ravens and such, and you'll find them just about everywhere. And very often you'll find them in social flocks. There's our raven, and they love to raid garbage cans and urban roads where they do a lot of cleanup. One of my initial ideas for the crow was to show it in a really urban habitat on an asphalt road, cleaning things up. And so this was a phone sketch. And I was intrigued with the idea, but I changed to a more natural habitat for the final composition. And this shows steps along the way to that habitat and final piece. Slabs for the background that are textured and then placed together. This is actually a piece that's composed of 4 elements, 4 components. And so I created the pieces to fit in place as of this 4 pieces with some overlap with one of the crows. And and I wanted to convey the idea of a winter sky, kind of a dull winter sky. And this is the final piece, Winter Gathering, where they are just considering the sunset, I think. I like to think of it that way, a winter sunset. Going from something like the crow, we come to a much smaller bird, the marsh wren. And I hope you have a chance to hear its bubbly little voice if you go on a walk in a bog or wetland. It's a charming little guy. Considering its habitat, I wanted to show that it is in reeds and marshland. And so this was a quick idea that I sketched for its habitat. And the transition from that sketch to the clay had me making coils and extrusions and stamping them with different textures and layering them one on top of another, and also layering underglazes and glazes. And this is the final piece titled In the Summer Reeds, with the marsh wren in its habitat under a summer sky. Well, if you love color, you got to have a blue jay. And this is what I consider a bird of patchwork habitat. Again, beautiful renditions in this Birds of Minnesota. This is the initial sketch for the blue jay composition. I wanted to show the bird in flight over a town scene, so to speak, and against some clouds. So you'll see how that shaped up. This is an in-process sketch with the blue jay in flight, clouds, and what is to become the town. And that's the final piece called Town Flyer. Again, you can see that I love these textures and contrasting surface effects. All right, Minnesota state bird, the common loon. Nests on lakes and ponds in the northern part of our state. And it was originally called the Great Northern Diver. And this again is from the rare book collection at the Arboretum Library, the Great Northern Diver. This is the beginning of my piece in the show called A Day at the Lake. You can see the loon taking off from the surface of the lake. And I wanted to show what goes on beneath the water. And so I created all these little guys, these little fish, which are its food. And you can see the crackled glaze that I used on those. And these are various stages of the piece in progress. None of them close to being final. And this is the final work, where everything kind of came together for A Day at the Lake. Now, this is another bubbly little bird that you might find in your backyard, the house wren. It loves open woodlands. And if you put out a wren house, you might attract a pair. Think about that in the next month or so. What house wrens do, they will find a nest site. They do nest in cavities, but they will use nest boxes. And the male wren will collect twigs and branches and bring them into the cavity. And so, and then the female will be attracted by his song, and she'll come to the various nest sites and decide which one she wants to use. So it's a very cooperative effort. And or maybe not, he's doing most of the work. Well, no, she does a lot of work after that. But anyway, so this is the final piece called Balancing Act. And I wanted to convey that stacking up of limbs and branches, and topped off by the house wren. Well, you might think the sparrow is unworthy of such of a show, of a work of art, but he's a good little guy. And if he wasn't in urban landscapes, he would be pretty dull out there in our cities and shopping malls, because basically they nest in any man-made opportunity. And he was introduced to New York City in the 1850s. There's a gentleman who was a real fan of Shakespeare, and he wanted to include every species of bird that he was in Shakespeare, and he wanted to introduce those birds to America. So he was responsible for bringing the first house sparrows over from Europe to Central Park, and they just had a ball after that, and they're everywhere. And they're really quite a beautiful bird. They will eat anything, mostly seeds, and they'll join you on outdoor dining patios as well. They don't migrate. But I wanted to show them in a habitat of a tree at dusk. And you bear with me, because this is a step-by-step depiction of that tree at dusk. I have memories growing up and listening to birds at dusk when they gather in a tree and just make a really loud, chattering, raucous sound. And most of those are sparrows. There are probably some starlings in there as well. Another good city bird. So I wanted to construct this tree onto which these chattering birds could gather. And so that was the beginning of the tree. And here are all the little birds, some of which are sparrows and some of which are little fantasy birds, different colors. And so they're all made individually. They're all glazed. They're all placed on the tree, the chatter tree. And there is the finished piece on the right, a wall piece made of 3 separate parts, and a detail here of all those little guys. Going to the boreal forests, I wanted to show a good looking little bird here called the Blackburnian Warbler. And basically you have to look like 60 feet up in the air to find him. And he will most likely attract you by the song before you see him. And so you'll find him up in northern Minnesota during a breeding season, nesting season. I wanted to show the flame-like aspect of that bird, how it has that really bright orange throat. And so the sculpture that I made to convey that hopefully does. And it's a very long distance migrant. This guy goes, again, all the way to South America and back up to Canada to find nesting sites in pines and conifers. So I did some research about pines and conifers in the library, and documented some ideas. And then I got back to the studio and decided to do a spruce tree top onto which this Blackburnian could perch. And so this was, again, a little by little process, doing each branch, attaching each branch to a larger branch. And then I also considered the background for those spruce, for that spruce tip. And what I wanted to convey here was the sky itself, the mountains where the bird migrates, and the forest in which it breeds. And so here's some isolated elements, and then here's the treetop flame, the title of the piece that's in at McCrosty. This guy's familiar, white-breasted nuthatch. Again, you can see him readily hopping up and down trees along with the female, going up and down. And they have a lovely little chirpy family illustrated in Robert's Birds of Minnesota. This began with a sketch, knowing that they are cavity nesters. I wanted to depict them as such, and I had developed this piece that had the openings for cavities. And I flattened these birds out in this case because they cling to those tree branches, tree trunks as they hop up and down. And so that's what I wanted to convey here. These are all multi-fired. I glaze and underglaze these things several times. And so there's a layering effect that happens with all of this work in the show. And here's a detail of up and down explorers. Rockbird is a totally abstract piece. I don't have a particular bird here in mind. It's an abstraction of a bird that nests in crevices or rocky cliffs. So it could be a peregrine falcon. I mean, those are down along Lake Pepin in Minnesota. And it could, you know, a cliff swallow, bank swallows, those types of birds that love that type of habitat. So again, I got involved in this piece. I really just love the abstraction of the habitat and the sort of monochromatic use of color and texture. The barred owl is fairly common in Minnesota, and we can certainly hear it more than we see it at night. It's the who cooks for you bird. And they nest in cavities, so they like mature forests. And so the piece I did had some of this kind of medieval reference to it. This is an illustration from a book titled Birds with Human Souls. And it shows an owl perched on a branch being attacked by other birds, magpies and crows. And of course, they do that. They attack the owl because it's a predator and it will come after small songbirds. So when these songbirds and other birds get together, they take the opportunity to mob that owl. The piece in the show at McCrosty began with a sketch. I think this is one of the more abstract pieces in the show, relating to my other work that you saw earlier. Again, conveying the idea of a forest scene with an owl and the forest creatures that are at the base of the tree. And you can see that on the left is the piece in progress with various glazes being brushed on. Again, a layering process. And then this is a photo of the finished piece called Night Companions. The night flight piece is also an abstract one. There's an abstract human form. I think it could be running. The form could be dancing. It could be jumping. It's open to interpretation, but it is pictured in a landscape with bird and stars. And so I like to think of it as a night flight on the, with respect to the human form as well as with respect to the bird. Okay, I'm going to close with a quote. Unclose your mind, you are not a prisoner, you are a bird in flight searching the skies for dreams. So there you have it. Thank you very much for joining the talk.
Thank you, Susan. That was fantastic. And I hope that folks will feel free to unmute themselves. If you'd like to turn your cameras on, you certainly can. And if you want to ask any questions or have any comments or whatnot, feel free to chime in.
And thank you, Katie, for the opportunity to show at McCrosty. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. We're very happy to have you.
Thanks. We liked it. Nancy and I liked it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
It's fun to see your artwork.
Mhm.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad you had a chance. You had a chance to see it in person then, huh?
Oh yeah, many times. We go there quite often.
Mhm.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments.
You, Susan, you referenced like that it's a multi-firing process. How many firings would you say are typically involved in a piece like that, or like some of these?
Well, with clay, a piece has to dry completely before it is fired for the first time. And that's the bisque firing. That's when clay changes chemically to ceramic.
Mhm.
And so there's that first firing. And then maybe after that first firing, I would apply underglazes for a second firing. And then glazes might follow up for a third or fourth firing. So it could be 4,
Mhm.
including the bisque. It all depends on how things come together. You know, when you have something that comes out of the kiln, you kind of realize, oh, I think this, I want to do some more with this, or, you know, I see that maybe there's something I want to add, or something is missing, or some effect. So it's very much a process.
Thanks.
Question, how are your pieces attached together? I noticed a lot of your birds were done separately and then put onto pieces. Is it done with slip or glue or?
Okay, that's a good question. When I first started as a ceramic artist, I was a purist, and I wanted everything to be secured together only with glaze. And as I worked along in the process of sculpting, and I worked with a mentor through my Jerome Grant year. She said, "You're a sculptor, you know, accept that, and you can use other materials. You don't have to restrict yourself to just glaze." And so I use a 2-part epoxy to secure certain things together. And the big bittern in the show, for instance, that is not secured. Those are stacked pieces, so not everything is secured. It kind of depends on the piece, but having stepped away from functionality, I can say I'm okay with epoxy.
Very good, your pieces are lovely and I enjoyed your talk.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining in.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? If not, I guess I would just say thanks again for joining us, and a big thanks to Susan for sharing this really informative and interesting talk with us. I'm really glad that we have it recorded, because we will get it up on our website, and you can find a link there if there's anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight that you'd like to share it with. Feel free to pass that along. Yeah, and thanks again for being here. You can see the exhibit video posted on our website at mccrostyartcenter.org. You can, if you're in Grand Rapids, you can view it in person through the end of the month. And yeah, Susan, do you have anything else to add at the end here?
No, well, yes, I do want to say that this is a body of work that I will continue to add to, because I find it sort of limitless in its visual possibilities and abstractions. And so I will, you know, it's something I enjoy doing for the purpose of my grant proposal, but I see it moving onward. It's also going to be included in a show at the Minnesota River Valley Wildlife Refuge in Bloomington in 2022. So it has about a year from now, the work that is in this show and probably some new pieces will be exhibited there as well, which I'm really happy about. It's a traveling show. I love it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, and if 249 breeding species, you'll have plenty of material.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and have a great evening.